Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This program is brought to you by regional dairy specialists with Cornell Cooperative Extension. Today, we will be discussing critical calf care, decision-making for urgent dairy calf health situations. This is episode 3, where we will cover record keeping and economics of disease. This is the third episode in a 7-part series. If this is the first portion of the series you're viewing, we hope that you will tune in to our other sessions as well. Recordings will be posted on YouTube. As a reminder, this content has been approved by the National Milk Producers Federation, FARM team, as continuing education. Add your participation in this program to your records for your next animal care audit. Today's presenters are myself, Margaret Quasdorf. I'm with the Northwest New York Dairy Livestock and Field Crops team, and I'm joined today by Alicia Dranke with the Southwest New York Dairy Livestock and Field Crops team. Before we jump in, we do want to remind everyone that we are not veterinarians, and the materials presented today are for educational purposes only. We strongly encourage all farms to have a veterinary client-patient relationship and that you consult with your veterinarian as the need arises. So in this specific episode today, we're going to cover why you might want to keep records on your dairy calves, what specific records you want to keep, and the economics of disease. And we'll go through a few examples of this at the very end. We're also going to have a couple opportunities to participate today. This is our first chat question. This is a chance to reflect on your own farm and put your answers right into the chat box as we go along here. So our first question, do you currently keep track of records on your farm? Type in either no, yes on paper, yes in an Excel spreadsheet, or some type of other computer program. So go ahead and type those answers right into the chat box and we'll see where everybody is working with. So we're going to start here. So why keep accurate records on your farm? Accurate records help you with evidence-based decision making. And when it comes to the review of your standard operating procedures, this is really important. Accurate records can also help you see trends over time and lets you know if you're getting closer or further away from your goals, or it might help you find out if there's a pattern in sickness or growth, whether that's positive or negative. Records are also used in communication. This might be like between shifts of people feeding or taking care of calves, or between employees and the management or vets on the farm. When you combine growth and health records with financial records, you can determine profitability and economic efficiency of the calf stage on your farm.
As Margaret mentioned, records are an important part of management, but it can be difficult to decide what to track. Farms should keep some sort of records starting at birth and carrying throughout an animal's life. It should be noted that farms will vary in their record-keeping approaches, particularly in the systems or methods that they use, the level of detail kept, and what aspects are tracked. This variation is completely fine. Records are a tool for you to utilize, so each farm needs to do what works for them. Today, we're just going to cover some different aspects that you may want to consider tracking on your farm. And we're going to focus on records for a calf today. And there are a lot of different aspects that you may want to consider tracking. And so we'll go into a little bit more detail about all of the different options that you see on your screen now. Starting with Dystocia, I know that Betsy and Casey did a wonderful job covering that in episode 2, and they did briefly mention record keeping. So for Dystocia, you may want to consider tracking the cow or heifer ID that has a Dystocia, the calf number that's born to a Dystocia. If human assistance occurs, who is that human and what sort of assistance do they provide? Is there any sort of injury to the cow or calf during parturition? What treatments are given at that time? If you suspect a cause of Dystocia, and then also what is the severity of the Dystocia? Looking at these records can help you utilize them in turn with your breeding records to determine if there's an opportunity to reduce Dystocia on your farm. It's also important to track colostrum, especially if there's an issue. For colostrum, you'll want to track quality, failure of the calf to drink colostrum, time from birth until consumption. And if you don't have an exact time, you can definitely just use an estimate. And then if a calf is tubed, what date that occurs, the time, and the employee that performs that tubing. Farms also should consider tracking if a calf is kept or sold. And if a calf is sold, where did that animal go? And is there any sort of income from that sale? Diseases and their treatments are extremely important to monitor. For diseases, you should consider tracking who the family and non-family employees trained to identify and treat a disease are, what symptoms determine a specific disease diagnosis, what treatment is provided for that, how long that occurs, and then also where the treatment records are recorded. You also should track when symptoms are present or first noticed, as well as when does diagnosis occur. And then you also want to make sure that you track treatment of that disease. And as treatments are being provided, you may have some overlap with some of your other records that you're tracking, but treatment records should include the ID of the animal, the date that treatment's provided, and the number of times per day that it's given. What is the location of that animal, and what is their diagnosis? What sort of drug are you using to treat an animal, and what dosage is being provided, as well as how is that being given to the animal? Is it orally? Is it through an IV? What's the duration of the treatment that you're going to give, and the withdrawal time for that specific drug? You'll also want to track the date that a withdrawal time is set to expire. It's also nice to have some space to add any sort of comments or other notes that you might see. Keeping these treatment records can help you make decisions about keeping a calf, or if you choose to sell them, if there's any sort of risk of contaminated meat. And while that list may have seemed like a lot, there are some pre-existing resources available for you to either use on your farm as is or adapt for what works for your farm. So you really don't need to start from scratch. And we will drop a link in the chat box to some resources for you. It's also important to monitor feed and water consumption in your calves because, as we mentioned in episode 1, it can be a key indicator that a health issue may be arising. So you will want to track the date that a calf has decreased feed, milk, or water consumption. What is the quantity that they did consume and how much is it decreased? The date that you notice any sort of increased water intake. Date that feed or milk is changed. So do you open a new bag? Do you get a new shipment? Anything like that. The date that any quantity or composition is changed. So are you transitioning them to a TMR or some sort of new diet? You'll want to track when that occurs. And then if calves do receive any sort of spoiled feed or milk, you want to make sure you monitor who gets that and when did they receive it. Monitoring growth rate by tracking birth and weaning weights can help you identify if your farm is hitting their growth goals. For vaccinations, you should keep track of the age an animal receives a vaccination, what date it's given, what type is provided, and what specific product that is, as well as the dosage that you provide. Also making sure that you're tracking the route of administration and if there's any sort of withdrawal time for that vaccination. For weaning, you should consider recording and monitoring the age at weaning, what the calf's feed intake is at that time, if there's any sort of additional procedures done, or if you notice any sort of illness around that time. And then also keeping track of if the calf is kept or sold, and if they're kept on the farm, where they go. Tracking all of these can help you identify if there's any areas that have consistent issues or opportunities for improvement in your weaning management protocols. And while in a perfect world, death losses would not occur, sometimes it is unavoidable or it promotes the best welfare of the calf. When this occurs, you should record the date of the death, the age that the animal was, if euthanasia was performed or if death was unassisted, You should track if a necropsy is performed and what the results of that necropsy are. And then if you can come to a conclusion of what the cause of death is, you should also keep track of that. It's also extremely important to check training and education for employees, family, and farm owners. This can help you understand who is qualified to perform what tasks on the farm, and it's also now part of the farm program version 4.0. So for training and education, you want to track the initial date that training is performed, what topics are covered, procedures they are approved to perform, date of continuing education, and the topic that's covered, so things like today. And then if somebody has any sort of special certification, such as beef quality assurance training. Records are a helpful tool that you can use on your farm to identify where management may need to be adjusted and what your total cost of production is. And most importantly, like we've said, you don't need to reinvent the wheel and come up with these record keeping systems on your own. There are a lot of software options available for you, or you can utilize some sort of Excel or paper version, or you can also just pull from the internet and utilize resources that are available for you there. And we'll go ahead and drop some more links in the chat for you to some existing resources. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Margaret to talk about economics.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to a section on economics. And the reason why we're talking about this is because calves are an investment in your future herd and profitability of the farm. Calves and replacement heifers account for about 15 to 20% of milk production costs, which is third after feed and labor costs. Remember, we have to measure what we want to manage, but fortunately, there are a lot of factors in our control, and those are things that we can keep accurate records on, apply economics to, and make decisions that are best for our dairy calves and businesses. So we're on to another chat question. Again, think about your own farm and put your answer in the box. Do you look back at your records to make economic decisions? Answer no, we don't review our records. Yes, we review our records, but we do not use them for economic decisions. Or yeah, we review our records and we use them to make economic decisions. So throw your answers into chat as we go along. Moving along, let's go over some typical costs of calf diseases. First, we're going to talk about bovine respiratory disease, with pneumonia being the most common of those. Typically, these occur in the first 30 days and at the time of weaning, or that transition time when calves are under a lot of stress. And about 36.6% of heifer calves experience some sort of bovine respiratory disease during those times. This can have a huge impact on both your calves' health and your bottom line, because calves that actually experienced a pneumonia or bovine respiratory disease incident before 70 days of age versus healthy calves weighed 12.7 pounds less than healthy calves at 90 days. And this is some data from Mike Overton out of Michigan State. These calves are also 2.8 times more likely to be culled before their first calving and 1.5 times more likely to be culled before 150 days in milk if they made it to the milking string. And when they were in that milking string, these calves that had experienced a pneumonia event made 649 pounds less milk during that first lactation. And overall, you look at some of the research, it's these are average costs, but typically it can range from $212 to $237 more than healthy heifers. Next, we'll talk about an infectious or pathogenic scours. So this is different than a nutritional scours. This is a scours that is caused by either a bacterial or a viral pathogen. And these typically occur in the first 30 days of life. And negatives of this are decreased rate of gain, higher culling risk, same as pneumonia, delayed ages at first calving and first service, lower future milk production. And when you have calves treated for scours, it can be very tedious for employees and increase your labor costs, as these calves tend to take a little bit more time and resources to make them feel better. In a study by Soberon in 2012, scouring calves treated with antibiotics gave 1,086 pounds less milk during their first lactation than those not treated. And I don't have the exact range for costs associated with scours because it can be a little bit diverse, but if you're just looking at the potential milk loss from the first lactation, you can do the math yourself with your numbers for your farm. Again, we mentioned that there were tons of factors that you can manage and practices that we control, and that accurate records of these current or past practices can be evaluated and changes can be made to our standard operating procedures that encourage healthy and profitable calves. Some of these factors fall under our operating costs, and examples of those would be the type of feed we choose and the costs associated with that. Labor costs we might not have as much control over, but we can possibly manage, how long it takes to complete a job or help our employees be a little bit more efficient and give them the resources needed to better complete a job. Another thing we can manage bedding type and choosing what works for our system and the costs associated with that. And preventative health measures may allow us to prevent costs later on in treatments. With good records, we can also keep track of and have more influence over mortality rates, hopefully, if we change our practices to prevent some of those. And also maybe we can look and see how are we doing, how are our calves grown, can we manipulate a little bit the age at weaning to affect our costs. But as we say a lot of times, all farms are different. My neighbor and I do things differently. How do I calculate these numbers and my costs for my own farm? Well, you're in luck because here at Cornell, we have some great resources available through the Cornell Pro Dairy website. And one of them is the Dairy Replacement Enterprise Analysis. And this is available if you work with one of our Pro Dairy staff. It's actually a spreadsheet that has a lot of different inputs, and it works best if you work together with somebody to help you work through it. Now, this is just an example of a farm that was looking at their wet calves, and the numbers are a little bit small and possibly hard to read, but the point is that with all of these inputs, you can determine your own numbers and your own costs and where you might be able to be more efficient on your own farm by using some of these different resources we have available. So next, we're going to go through a couple other examples of how to track some different things on your farm, use your records, and put economics to it to make some decisions. Let's start with something simple to keep track of: passive transfer of immunity. This can help you judge the effectiveness of your colostrum management program. So your SOP says that calves are to receive 1 gallon of high-quality colostrum within 2 hours of birth. Let's find out if this is working on your farm. From 12 healthy calves that are 1 to 7 days old, collect blood from the jugular vein with a 20-gauge needle, a 3 cc syringe, and a red top Vacutainer. Make sure that the calf is not dehydrated already, as dehydration can cause false elevations in the total serum protein numbers. Next, let the sample sit for 12 to 24 hours upright on a bench top so that the serum can separate. You could also use a centrifuge to spin it out. Now, let's use our records to evaluate our system and make some decisions. So how are we doing here? If we use the new standards of successful passive transfer put forth this year by Dr. Jason Lombard, then we can say that our SOP is doing what it's supposed to be doing if we are consistently getting greater than 6.2 grams per deciliter on 40% of calves, and good passive transfer of immunity if 30% of our calves register at 5.8 to 6.1 grams per deciliter. We might start to worry if we see that more than 20% of our calves have 5.1 to 5.7 grams per deciliter, or more than 10% of our calves are reading less than 5.1 grams per deciliter. Just a note here, if you're feeding a colostrum replacer, expect readings to be about 0.2 grams per deciliter less, but that doesn't indicate poor transfer. Okay, so looking at our results, We don't quite have 12 calves to look at yet, but let's see how we're doing. We have a few excellent, several goods, a fair, and a poor. And maybe more calves and more data collection is necessary to see where we truly fall, but it's looking to me like we might need to revisit our timing and quality of colostrum moving forward. And specifically, we may need to keep an eye on calf 505 and 506. Common reasons why calves fall into the poor category are inadequate colostrum management, so that's poor quality, not giving it on time, or not giving enough. Another reason might be dystocia, which often leads to calves with poor antibody absorption capabilities. And there are also unknown reasons. Even with perfect care, we can still have poor passive immunity, and we need to do more research to tell us why. What we do know from Lombard's data is that calves with poor passive immunity have a much higher probability of becoming sick within 60 days of age than other calves. So again, calf 506 sticks out to us as someone to keep track of and watch. So here we are at chat question number 3. Do you monitor the treatment costs of illness in your calves and heifers? Put a number 1 if no, we don't monitor treatments or costs of illness. Number 2 if we monitor treatments but we don't calculate costs. Or number 3, yes, we monitor treatments and calculate the cost of illness. If you have other answers, feel free to toss those in as well. You can use a sheet similar to this, but adjust it for calves, and then with this treatment information, you can add your economic data to it to see where it comes out. So here is a spreadsheet similar to the one that I used in a previous role as a calf manager. A little bit of background. I knew we had a pneumonia issue in our calves, and previous managers had a hard time controlling it due to overcrowding in the calf barn. Money was tight, and to truly fix the issue, we needed a new calf barn or a lot fewer calves in the calf barn that we had. Upper management wanted to raise all heifers born on the farm, plus some beef calves, so we were really crowded and we ended up treating a lot of calves. Again, money being tight, management wanted us to use a less expensive drug initially to treat pneumonia, but after working with these calves and putting in a ton of extra time and care, I wanted to see if something else would work better, as well as be more economically feasible. So here's an example of my thought process for a treatment, cure rate, and cost comparison, and maybe it's something that you could use as well on your farm. Here we have all the different items I kept track of for a partial budget. And here are the costs and factors you might want to look at that are associated with 2 different antibiotics. Here's the breakdown. Drug A costs $145 per bottle and B costs $490 per bottle. I can treat each calf for $4.65 or $10.78 per dose. And the vet says I should use 1 dose each, even though you can see there that the size of the dose is different for each drug. I had to treat a total of 9 calves out of the 18 that were born that month, and 5 got drug A and 4 got drug B. So if we just look at the cost of treatment, A is a cheaper drug, and it looks like it wins. But let's look at the cure rate. Only 40% of calves on the farm recovered when treated with A, and 75% recovered when treated with B. I chose to switch and treat with B after the failed attempt with A, and a second round of B for the one that didn't resolve with the first treatment of B. This time my calves all got better of those ones that didn't get better the first time, and my cost to retreat was $32.34 because I switched to B that second time, and then $10.78 for that second round of B for that other one calf. So my total cost to cure was $55.59 and $53.90 for A and B. And that's not including labor, which now is showing B to be the better choice. But this could swing back and forth depending on how you choose to retreat. But the key really is the cure rate. What's going to work best on your farm? Let's think some more. I treated 50% of my calves for pneumonia. This is a pretty high number. What else might I do to prevent them from getting sick? Is there a way to possibly boost immunity? What do I do with the calves that did get sick? We know that pneumonia results in poor growth rates, longer days of first service and age at first calving, and decreased milk production. Another thought: how many of these calves do I need to keep as replacements? It'd be good if I calculated that number so that I could reduce the overcrowding right away. But for now, if I keep the treated ones, I know that they have at least one strike against them if more things go wrong with them in the future. Let's look back at the records. Are any of these calves number 505 or number 506? Oh man, 506 has been treated for scours too, and she does look a little rough. That's 2 strikes for her, and I do have a lot of calves. Maybe it's time for her to leave the herd before I lose more money or she loses more quality of life. Again, we have resources available through Cornell to help you run partial budgets, go more in depth on specific areas or life stages on your farm, and ways to keep track of your business year after year and compare yourself to other farms of similar size and management style. We'll make sure to drop the links in the chat box so that they are available for you. That brings us to our final key considerations of today, and those are that records can be a helpful management decision tool. Records can give you a more clear picture of what occurs on your farm, and combine growth and health records along with financial records to determine profitability and economic efficiency of your calf program on your dairy. With that, we would like to thank you for participating today. Join us for the next session of Critical Calf Care, Hydration Status and Electrolytes, which will be on January 26, 2021. And we're happy now to answer any questions you may have regarding today's presentation. Please enter them in the Q&A feature now. Thank you.
All right, we would welcome any questions anybody might have. Go ahead and type them in. We'll give you a chance to get them in. One quick question that just popped up. Where can I find past presentations? We'll pop that link into the Zoom chat for you. We are storing a lot of the resources plus the presentations in a box folder. You can access all the different weeks, the resources and presentations. The recordings are on the Northwest New York team's YouTube page, so you can watch the live, the recorded version as well at that YouTube page. We'll pop that link in the chat as well. All right, so we do have a question in the Q&A. Our calf raiser gives us a fail, pass, and dehydrated scoring for calf serum scores. How do we reduce the dehydrated percentage, or is this something that we should not worry about too much?
If you're using the Hemocrat capillary tubes, you can measure dehydration status, so that might be how they're doing it in determining dehydration percentage, but I would just say, yes, you should worry about it, but just in the sense of how you're interpreting it. So if you're getting passive transfer levels from dehydrated calves, they're likely going to be inflated, and that can give you a false sense of security that you're doing a really good job with your colostrum management. I just see Nicole said they call dehydrated greater than 8. And is that on a brick scale or a gram per, what is it? Deciliter scale. So that's, yeah, that's tough. I don't know per se. 8 is high if you're using the grams per deciliter scale. Yeah, it might be because they're dehydrated, but I don't know of an exact number where you can make that cutoff per se, but I would say try to make sure that you're taking those blood samples, ideally within an hour to an hour and a half of them being fed, and that's going to help with the dehydration. And I just see she said again, so fails less than 5.5, passes 5.6 to 7.9. So yeah, I would have to assume that you're using the gram per deciliter scale, and I would just use caution when you're interpreting those values if they're coming from dehydrated calves. But if your calves aren't dehydrated and you're taking those samples within the 1 to 1.5 hour range, and they are over 8. I'm not sure how you would interpret that, or if you should continue to interpret that as though they are dehydrated, and that might be a good question for your veterinarian. We have a question in the chat box. Do you know if there is a way to track cost of treatment through PC Dart?
I don't know specifically. We didn't have it set up on our PC Dart, which is why I tracked it on Excel. But that's definitely something that I could look into. And if you put your email, I can get back to you on that one, unless somebody else has a different answer.
Okay, we have another question in the chat box. When is the optimal time frame to collect a blood sample for total protein testing?
You're going to want to take calves that are 1 to 7 days old, but you want to make sure that it's not immediately after. Maybe Casey, you can help me with the hours after feeding colostrum.
They have to be at least 24 hours old. And then if you are feeding transition milk, so I noticed in one of the projects that I'm working on that some of the samples came back, I can't think of the technical term right now, but they almost came back like fatty. And I had spoke with a vet, and he said that it's possible that it's the colostrum that's, if you're taking it within that 1 to 2 hours after feeding, that could be influencing the profile of the blood. So just something to consider, but they have to be at least 24 hours old and then up to 7 days old. And I've heard some vets even go up to 10 days old. So that would be the optimal time frame.
Great. There's another question in the chat. Do you have any info on the economics on the prevention side of things? For example, the cost of hygiene programs for feeding utensils, hutches, dividers, etc.
I don't have anything specifically. I know that with some of the Pro Dairy spreadsheets, they go through the cost of equipment and cost of time that it takes to do all the different jobs, and you could probably break it down in one of those type spreadsheets, but I don't have anything, just a basic cost, and probably it's going to be different for each farm and each setup, but that's great that you're thinking about it that way, because prevention is really the way to go when you're dealing with all of this. And if you need some more resources in helping you figure that out for your farm, don't hesitate to reach out if you want to go through that process.
Yeah, if you're in one of our regions, reach out to us, reach out to your county extension educator if you're not. And if you don't know who that is, reach out to Pro Dairy directly, and they can certainly help you work through it, because those guys are number geeks. So they love to try and figure stuff out.
So we have another question in the chat box. Where can I'm assuming it's where can I see this webinar? So right above that comment, we have the resources or the links to episodes 1 and 2. So if you would like to refer to both of those, and then using that YouTube channel for future reference, that is where the recordings to the upcoming webinars will be posted.
We welcome you to join us next week. Margaret and I will be discussing hydration status and electrolytes, and we look forward to having you here with us. Same time, same Zoom link, same everything. So thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it looks like we did get one more.
Yeah, it hopped in. We'll do it quick. Yeah, go for
it. In group housing for our calves that are fed free choice, when do you suggest taking the blood sample for total protein? Yes, excellent choice, or excellent question. And I mean, Margaret or Alicia, do you guys want to? Okay. So I've struggled with this on one of my research projects with group housed calves, and it is really tough to know when the calves eat. And I think that's a really good example of when you need to use your best judgment and see if you get really high numbers, the calves are likely dehydrated, and you just have to interpret those with caution and just know that it might be better to take the sample at another time. And then alternatively, if you're able to do it in the morning, I mean, calves usually have a meal in the morning. So if you try to just pay attention to when calves are eating. That might be another good strategy for trying to get optimal hydration status.
Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see y'all next week.